and again has had a distinguished career in combating corruption in public service. Advocate Mothibi, thank you for being part of this webinar. Good evening.
Thank you, Mark. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to have this opportunity to engage widely with the public on this very important subject. Thank you.
Thank you. And our third panelist, who briefly popped up on the screen and disappeared again, but hopefully will come back, I'll introduce him now, is Willie Hofmeyr. Willie Hofmeyr was himself previously the head of the Special Investigative Unit. He was also for many years the head of the Assets Forfeiture Unit, I think for 16 years. So again, another person who is very, very well versed in this question of whistleblowing. And Willie Hofmeyr will come online as soon as we can sort out his signal problems. So, Thuli, starting with you, Professor Madonsela, whistleblowing has obviously been crucial to unpacking state capture in South Africa, to trying to revive constitutionalism, to putting social justice and human rights back on the agenda. Could you begin just by introducing the subject, why it's important, but particularly what you think we need to be doing as a society to strengthen and to protect whistleblowers?
Thank you, Mark. Greeting to my esteemed colleagues, Advocate Mothibi and Willie Hofmeyr. Thank you for the work you all doing. Auditing is regarded as an important practice in ensuring that companies and state entities function in accordance with the law. And more importantly, auditing increasingly takes care of matters such as fraud, corruption, etc. And after auditing, of course, we rely on oversight agencies such as the SIU, which is with us today, the Public Protector, etc., that come after things have been broken. However, do we know that auditing only picks up 1 in 10 crimes or white-collar crimes that we can classify as corruption, fraud, and embezzlement? Only 1 out of 10. Because the nature of auditing is that it is not a forensic exercise. It is just supposed to look at compliance, but increasingly it is looking more. So who then takes care of the 9 out of 10? What I discovered as a public protector was that a lot of what we know about corruption in companies, in state affairs, and other forms of crime, including just cheating of people, we know all of those things through whistleblowers. But it doesn't come without a cost, particularly to the whistleblower and those that are close to him or her. And that takes us to many questions such as, what is a whistleblower and who is a whistleblower? And as the name suggests, it's the kind of person who blows a whistle or who alerts us to wrongdoing. It could be wrongdoing where a hospital, for example, left a swab in somebody's body and the person ended up dying, and the hospital is saying it was a natural cause. But a lot of it is about fraud, corruption, and what we have eventually referred to as state capture. But not every whistleblower is regarded as a whistleblower by law, because literally we've said it's one who blows the whistle or one who alerts us to wrongdoing. But the law decides who of those who alert us to wrongdoing can be classified as a whistleblower. As it stands at the moment, the Protected Disclosures Act only recognizes employees as whistleblowers. And there's been attempts, and there's still a process that is looking at extending the Protected Disclosures Act to cover every whistleblower, including those that are not employees. The second problem becomes, what are you protected from? But let's start with some of the whistleblowers that are not protected. If, for example, you're involved in a tender process and you're not an employee, but somebody asks you for a bribe, you're not a whistleblower, and therefore the consequences that are suffered by whistleblowers will be visited on you. So what does the law protect you from when it comes to consequences? Of course, the Protected Disclosures Act primarily protects you from suffering an occupational detriment. So automatically, you're not protected from losing a tender because you're a whistleblower, or from being unofficially blacklisted from future tenders. And then secondly, there's also at the moment a disconnect between the whistleblower, the Protected Disclosures Act, and the Witness Protection Act. And when I was public protector, of course, we did have a good relationship with the witness protection people and making sure that some of the whistleblowers were covered, or some of the whistleblowers that were already with them were rescued from whatever malpractices that they were suffering. But there's still a disconnect in that it's not a natural progression from being a whistleblower into witness protection, because what are you likely to suffer? It's not just an occupational detriment. You could lose your life. Another area that is not yet protected is financial consequences, because if you whistleblow, for example, some of them will then hit you with civil proceedings. If you look at Mothibi, who whistleblew, for example, against Trillion and related parties in the state capture investigation, she was locked in litigation left, right, and center. On the one hand, she was being investigated for criminal activities, for reporting a matter to an institution that is prescribed under the Act. The Public Protector is one of the institutions that are not even nominated later. They directly prescribed under the Act that you should report to the Public Protector and the Auditor General. But she suffered consequences. The other thing that you're not protected from is you're not protected from being dismissed for an employment infringement that is not about the whistleblowing. For example, I know somebody from Midval who was clearly dismissed by the Democratic Party specifically for whistleblowing, but most people are not dismissed for whistleblowing. They're dismissed for using too much toilet paper or something like that. If you take Figile Reject from KZN, she whistleblew, but she did more than whistleblowing. She did more something similar to Decoran, and we don't have a name for people who do more than whistleblowing, who whistleblow but also stop the rot from happening. If you are a financial officer and you refuse to pay for things that you shouldn't be paying for, I think you hate it more than a whistleblower, because you really stop the process from moving forward. So she was fired. Practically, it was said she was rude and hierarchical. And this is a young person who had been a stellar performer throughout her career until she gets to a treasury that is doing things it shouldn't be doing, including paying for a jazz festival that never happened. Just lastly, I have indicated that you're not protected also from litigation. And the last thing that you're not protected from is after you've been fired, they will make sure that at the very least you get paid off. If you look at Figile, for example, we brought her back, but today she's still unemployed because they were not prepared to put her in the position where she was before, because she wasn't just a whistleblower, she was stopping the payments. But the last thing that you don't get protected from is being re-employed. For normal criminals, for example, and of course whistleblowers are not criminals, but for criminals, there are many agencies today that are looking at reintegration in society. And I think we're not doing enough to reintegrate whistleblowers into society. Everyone says we love whistleblowers because they tell us what we need to know and they help us to stop the rot. But when it comes to getting employed, nobody wants to employ a whistleblower, partly because of cultural reasons. In Zulu, there's no word for whistleblower. And I saw one department that was advertising a whistleblower campaign and said, and then they had a transfer in Zulu where they said impimpi. I couldn't believe my eyes. That how could a government department call a whistleblower impimpi? Because impimpi are the people who got banned during apartheid. burnt alive during apartheid because they were regarded as enemies of the people. And therefore, a whistleblower, we need better name, better words for it. And that's all I can say at this stage. And thank you again for the privilege.
Thank you very much, Professor Madonsela, for that rich and important introduction. Thank you, too, for basing your comments on real-life examples and sacrifices that have been made by real people. You know, it seems to me that you must be a very brave person to be a whistleblower, because there are more areas where whistleblowers are not protected than areas where they are protected. And I'm going to come back and explore that as this conversation proceeds. And I think it's important, too, that you've put a question mark over this term whistleblower. I don't think Babita Deokaran necessarily thought of herself as a whistleblower. She was a public servant who was doing her job honestly and doing what she felt ethically obliged to do by reporting on theft and corruption. And certainly we must be careful of terms that stigmatize good people as if they are doing bad things. In fact, somebody suggested to me that we should use the term citizen disclosure rather than whistleblower. But perhaps we'll come back to that a little bit later. But thank you, Prof. Madonsela. I'm going to turn now to Advocate Mothibi, the current head of the SIU, and ask Advocate Mothibi for your perspective on this question and whether we're doing enough to fill these loopholes that Professor Madonsela has talked about. You'll need to put your microphone on.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mark. And let me also greet Professor Madonsela and my fellow panelists, Advocate Hofmeyr. I'm really indebted to the organizers of this webinar so that we can engage on this very important subject. And I'm glad you really informed the public that this is really taking place, driven jointly by the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum, and of course in partnership with Maverick Citizen and other parties who are in the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum, where we really encourage the civil society participation of labor, participation of government in ensuring that a sectoral approach is adopted in the fight against corruption. And by the way, the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum, for those who may not recall, was born out of the government's initiative to really want to fight corruption in those vulnerable sectors, and a risk assessment was done, and health sector was one of those that where we started. We now it was launched by the president in 2019. So we are glad to really see traction, and all the parties really putting effort in ensuring that the fight in this sector is really heightened against corruption. Just to say, we've got now a forum in the infrastructure build, which is really championed by Minister Thuli, and then we've got the local government anti-corruption forum that is championed by Minister Dlamini Zuma, and all of this really are coordinated under the ACTT banner in a program that is coordinated by SIU. I really wanted to just give this picture. Today's subject is very important. As part of the awareness raising of the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum, the whistleblower protection and witness protection was identified as those subjects that we needed to go out there and raise awareness on. But of course, it was speeded up by the experience of the gruesome murder that we experienced of Babita Deokaran. Right? So it became so important that we really now speak out and ensure that the would-be witnesses, would-be whistleblowers understand what is the legal framework, as Prof. Madonsela has really outlined, but from law enforcement agencies such as SIU, the DPCI, and other law enforcement agencies in government, we are really geared up to ensuring that when matters and cases are reported to us, we put in place measures that would ensure that that the witnesses or whistleblowers are protected. The public would know. If I give an example of this well-publicized PPE investigations that SIU has conducted, those matters has really been brought to SIU by whistleblowers in government and outside of government, in public sector, in private sector, right? And how they do that, we've got an independent company that's running our hotline, whistleblower hotline. And why do we do that? We do that firstly to ensure that there's confidentiality, and confidentiality has been recognized also, as one of the measures to ensure that whistleblowers are protected. It is also to ensure that there's anonymity, right? Anonymity is also another measure to ensure that, whistleblowers are protected. The professor, without repeating what she said, in terms of the Protected Disclosures Act, you would know that more often, and I used the PPE example, but it just applies generally, that almost 95% of the SIU investigations are procurement-based. And you would guess why that so much percentage is on procurement. It's simply because that's where the money is. And all those who would like to corrupt others and corrupt the system, they would then focus on the procurement process, right? And more often, it is officials who become aware of this corruption, maladministration around procurement processes. And we have seen that officials do come out in many instances. And then it becomes very important that part of the legislation, the Protected Disclosures Act, really kicks off so that those officials are protected. In other instances, of course, there's members of the public who report, as Prof has indicated, that there's probably an opportunity of improvement there, such that the Protected Disclosures Act does not only focus only on employees, and that it cover also other members of the public. But we do put in place measures such that both members of the public and those who are officials, whether in public or in private, are equally protected. So when witnesses come up, because after whistleblowing, now you get ultimately investigation. Now during the investigation, you get then witnesses being identified in the process. Okay, all those who come forward to give affidavits, to give evidence, and all of those as well, they would require some protection. But the principles that we always put forward is that when witnesses, and of course equally to whistleblowers, when at any point in time they become aware that their lives or those of their loved ones are threatened, they should immediately report to the law enforcement agents, either to SAPS, to SIU, and the rationale, of course, is that so that those measures put in place by the Protected Disclosures Act, which really ensures that whistleblowers are not put in harm's way, they are not prejudiced in any way, There's also what Prof referred to, Witness Protection Act. Those measures are available for witnesses who come out to ensure that they are really protected. Again, I mean, Prof made a few examples. The example that I can also give is that in our life as a Esidimeni, which is one of the investigations which we conducted, and I mean it's well known. There's now an inquest running around that matter. When we started the investigation, there's a witness in the process of the investigation who one evening, just before we knocked off at SIU, she rocked up at our offices and said, "I am not going back home because I have been threatened that I will be killed if I return home," simply because she was a witness in the Life Esidimeni investigation. And we immediately kicked in the Witness Protection Act mechanism, and she was taken up in that witness protection, and she was adequately protected. That's really just one example I can give. And by the way, just to also indicate that the protection that we give or that's there provided by the legislation and our processes also applies to the investigators, right? The investigators also get similar threats, and we do take equally measures that would ensure that our investigators are protected. So from the point of view of legislation, and I can also just refer to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the African Union Protocol Against Corruption, all of those instruments, Mark and the colleagues and the public, all of those instruments require state parties to ensure that they put in place measures to protect whistleblowers. South Africa is part of the G20 as well. Just as an example, in the G20, South Africa has been ranked as one of the best countries, together with the UK, Japan, and the others. But the important part, Mark, and the public, is to make sure that these measures are implemented and the witnesses. And I'm sure later on we can talk around how is it that we improve the situation so that really witnesses and whistleblowers can be adequately protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate Mothibi. I'm watching what's going on in the chat, and I'm going to bring some of those questions and suggestions to you and Professor Madonsela within a few minutes. But I just want to check whether Willie Hofmeyr is... I see that he's in the room, although I can't see him in front of me. But if you're able to, Willie Hofmeyr, I'd be very happy if you could say a few words now based on your own experience and views on this matter, if we can hear you. Okay, it seems like it now says Willie Hofmeyr has left the room. So we're going to stick with Professor Madonsela and Advocate Mothibi. Prof. Madonsela, I'm going to put the same question to both of you. Prof. Madonsela, you talked a lot about the loopholes and the gaps in protection. Advocate Mothibi talked about how we respect our whistleblowers, the process that commences when somebody blows the whistle and reports corruption. But I think that if you talked to most whistleblowers, they would tell you that their experience has been a very difficult one, personally. In fact, I can even see in the chat, Martha saying, as a whistleblower, I really feel not enough is done to protect whistleblowers. There's been a lot of discussion on this subject matter, but I'm not sure that anything concrete is shown that the protection exists. The PDA is not sufficient. I really pray and hope that we will see something concrete being done. And Adila says these whistleblowers PDA hotline are not effective in protecting the whistleblowers. an independent body is required to ensure the integrity of investigation, not the employer, who is the judge, jury, and executioner. And it makes me think, Advocate Mothibi, you mentioned Life Esidimeni. The people who have been implicated in Life Esidimeni are having hundreds of thousands of rands spent on them for lawyers in the inquest which is currently taking place, whilst the victims and the families and the people who blew the whistle find themselves marginalized and in great discomfort. So, starting with Professor Madonsela, I want you now to come to some of the concrete things that need to happen and when they need to happen if we are going to do more than pay lip service to these sacrifices. I see Willie Hofmeyr is now online, but I'm going to take Prof. Madonsela first, and then I'm going to come to Willie Hofmeyr. Prof. Madonsela.
Thank you, Mark. I suggest that the first thing that needs to happen is what my colleague Advocate Mothibi has already said, is expand the definition of a whistleblower so that everyone who whistleblowers is protected. The second thing is to expand the framework of the perils that you are protected from. The emphasis is on occupational detriment, but with a direct link. If you look at the American law, particularly as it relates to false claims against the state, which is similar here when it comes to inflated tenders, you are not allowed, most states prohibit any employment action against you, any disciplinary action against you that is initiated after you have whistleblown, because then that's where people are going to manufacture things against you. So expand the number of people, the group that is protected as whistleblowers. Secondly, expand the stream of protection within the workplace. And then thirdly, tighten the link between the Witness Protection Act, because as Advocate Mothibi said, it's directed mostly at witnesses. So if you have disclosed to the public protector or to the Auditor General or to some other agency, and there hasn't been a decision made yet that you'll be a witness, there's no decision to prosecute, then you're not protected. And also, one of the cases I dealt with was if you were on witness protection and then the state decides not to prosecute, you dropped just like that out of witness protection, whereas the other party still has a bullet with your name on it, whether it's a literal bullet or it's a financial bullet, and that's where they take you for civil action, which takes me to the civil action. We need a civil action fund that makes sure that if retaliatory action is taken against people on civil matters, then we deal with that. Some also would take the criminal process. We know whistleblowers, for example, that have been prosecuted criminally for stealing information, and that is Musilo is one of those. So the last thing is the protection of your family as well, because if you're going on whistleblower protection, your family is needed. And certainly in South Africa, we're a small country. You see, in other countries, you can be taken to another province where you can have an assumed name temporarily. Because South Africa is quite small, we do understand that it's difficult to make you disappear in the system. But I would say that if we just tighten the protection, there will be more people that come in. And then the last thing is reintegration. So many people are unemployed. I did mention Fikile Hlachwayo Rujet from KZN, but there are many others. There is Sipho Maseko, for example, Temba Maseko, who's still unemployed. And therefore other people would see these people and say, why should I whistleblow if I am going to end up being unemployed? But lastly, people like Babita, They're not whistleblowers. They are the people who stand in the way. So I think the law should recognize them differently, because I think there's more anger towards them because they need the money and you're standing there. If they can't fire you, then they'll have to find other ways of dislodging you because they need the money. It's a criminal syndicate that needs that money.
Thank you, Prof. Madonsela, for 6 very concrete points, which we will return to. I'm watching a lot of very important discussion on the chat with some very important suggestions. And I just want to say to those who are engaged in the chat that the Special Investigative Unit, the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum, and others will be taking account of this discussion, as well as anybody who wants to report issues to do with corruption, whistleblowing, etc. So continue that conversation, please, even if I'm not able to come to every single person who's making a useful suggestion. Willie Hofmeyr, we now have you, and it's lovely to see you. Well, not to see you, but know that you're in the room. I have introduced you in your absence, but I'm going to come straight to you and ask you to give your views on mechanisms and measures that will strengthen whistleblower protection and whistleblower processing in our country. Good evening, Willie.
Good evening, and sorry for my battle to get onto the platform. I wanted to make a bit more of a radical proposal, because I think we are in a time when we need radical change in how we deal with whistleblowers and corruption. So my suggestion is that we should set up a new institution called the Office for Whistleblower Protection, or a Whistleblower Protector, something like that. And I think we should ask the Chief Justice and Deputy Chief Justice to appoint some retired Constitutional Court judges to run that office. Because I think that's the one institution where everybody still has, almost everybody, I suppose, still have faith in, and that is the sort of judges of the Concord. So with that would go, I think, a number of other things, that they should appoint a small staff for Advocate Mothibi's SIU. I think that the integrity testing that the SIU uses should be used on all people employed by the judges to work on cases, so that we can be assured of their loyalty. We also, I think, need to look at a very secure way in which whistleblowers can report. I mean, there are various mechanisms that I don't really want to discuss on here where others can hear it.
Thank you, Willie.
But I think there are ways in which communication with other people can be secure. I do think that there should be... Sorry?
Continue. No, sorry. Pardon for interrupting you. Continue, Willie.
Okay, so the other suggestions I have is that the office would build up a database of lawyers who are willing to act pro bono for whistleblowers, or else the law should provide that legal aid should pay for the legal costs that are incurred by the whistleblowers. I think there's a fair amount of money in there, and I think this is one of the most worthy causes. But I think importantly, the whistleblower protector should have the power to force the criminal justice system to do investigations. So when a whistleblower comes, there would be people with the necessary power who can do those investigations. They probably should be done under the guidance of the protector rather than under the guidance of people in law enforcement who may be captured, as has happened in the recent past. I think that issue has come up, but the office should have the option to put people on the witness protection program that the NPA runs, at least for limited times. And then I think in terms of funding, my suggestion is that one should look at the partnership between somebody like BUSA, Business Unity South Africa, and other businesses to set up a fund, basically, that can help to fund this. My other suggestion is that I think there's well over 100 million rand in the criminal asset recovery account that the asset forfeiture unit money goes to. So I think some of that money could be used to set up a formal structure. But, I do think that one needs a formal structure with real power to order the state to do things, and the private sector for that matter. But, if we don't do that, I think we're not really taking things to a different level from where they are at the moment. Now, in the last few months, I've sort of heard the stories of numbers of whistleblowers, just kind of to try and deal with the realization and other things that happened to them in the process.
Thank you, Willie Hofmeyr. I'm going to move back to Advocate Mothibi now, partly because the quality of your line was deteriorating a little bit, but very important concrete points, particularly your suggestion about an office for whistleblower protection, issues around security of reporting. I noticed on the chat that the SIU puts up contact details for their hotline for anybody who needs that number now. But now turning to Advocate Mothibi. Advocate Mothibi, you've heard the discussion. We all pay respect, recognize the bravery, but everybody thinks we're not doing enough. From your hot seat at the SIU, what do you think needs to be done? And do you agree? Please feel free to agree or disagree with Professor Madonsela or Willie Hofmeyr as well.
No, thank you, Mark. Mark, listening to my colleagues, Prof. Madonsela and Advocate Hofmeyr, I totally agree with some of the possible improvements or changes that would be put forward, and those could be Mark, and those who are really organizing in the health sector anti-corruption forum, that those could be really put together, consolidated, so that they can really be presented in the process and presented to the ACTT and ultimately, of course, to the JCPS, and they are presented in the right levels in government. I think government is on record saying that the whistleblower witness protection framework is receiving attention with possible consideration for improvements or changes for improvement. Now, Mark, I'm in the seat that deals with these issues, practically on a daily basis, and we would require, just in the PPE corruption maladministration space, we're investigating more than 4,000 contracts, and we would like to investigate them effectively and make sure that those who are responsible are held to account, either through civil litigation. And when we go to civil litigation also, we do require affidavits, and those affidavits are given by witnesses. We also do require that where there's criminal action, those criminal actions are punished through prosecution and so on. Now, practically, it means that all of those who came forward and provided this evidence, provided the affidavits, they need to really be assured that these measures that we speak of currently, in the current legal environment or legal framework, that they should be assured that they will be protected, right? In fact, I'm just thinking, going forward, and this is something that we can practically even do as investigators or as SIU and other law enforcement agencies. You would know, if I just give an example, that when accused when an accused person is arrested, normally there's something called a warning statement. that's taken from the accused, right? And the warning statement is meant really to say, is there anything that you would need to say? And if you say it, be aware that it may be used against you, and so on and so forth. And that is some of the constitutional rights, that the criminal justice system is expected to execute against those who are arrested as accused. So now, what about the witnesses? What about the whistleblowers? So I would immediately say, when we really interact with witnesses, and because this is really around awareness raising, so that when you meet with a witness, immediately bring forward some of this witness protection framework, so that the witness is immediately aware at the time of first interaction with investigators, as you take their statement, so that we don't wait for a moment like we really experienced with Ms. Diokran. So in that way, I think we will continue to just bring improvements in the awareness of the whistleblowers and witnesses, and therefore then we will have, all of those who are making comments in the chat now, the current legal framework is there. Of course, with what my colleagues are saying, there is serious room for improvement. But I would like to just really agreeing with what Prof and Advocate Hofmeyr have said. I do agree with the proposed improvements. More often, we would get witnesses coming up and say, no, I think my life is at risk. One example is our investigator in one of the provinces was approached with a bribe, right? And it was publicized recently. And the person who wanted to bribe our investigator was arrested after the investigator came up and said, no, this is a person who wants to arrest me. This is in the PPE investigation. And we put together the processes together with the Hawks and to ensure that this person is arrested, and he was arrested. So what did we do now? Because once, and again, it got so worse for our investigator when the person was ultimately granted bail, right? And the investigator says, no, I feel unsafe. And we had, Mark, to take action to ensure that, that investigator is protected while working on the case, and that even included having to accommodate her in another province, I would say. And I'm saying this specifically so that, witnesses and investigators should know that, with the resources that we have, with the current legal framework that we have, there are measures that we can put in place to ensure that witnesses are protected. Advocate Hofmeyr mentioned the witness protection program that is run by NPA. It's got measures to ensure that witnesses that are identified as being at risk, they are put through that program. Of course, in some instances, it may have drastic measures, like as Prof. Madonsela indicated. We need to look at those measures where even to an extent of identity changes, uprooting a person from one province to the other, or possibly from South Africa to another country, and that of course will entail cooperation with other countries. But Mark, let me just indicate that the Public Service Commission has commissioned a study, and they've got a number of recommendations, which, if there's still time, I can read through them. They've got a number of recommendations, such as including, armed protection consideration, safe housing, but all of this needs to be considered and then taken into the possible, amendments to the Protected Disclosures Act, Witness Protection Act, so that there's coverage both for the officials and non-officials. It's very important that, that part of the witness protection definition is expanded to non-employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate Mothibi. Again, there's furious discussion going on the chat line. I see comments from Zwelenzima Vavi saying thousands of workers know things and have seen things, but until we can offer them real protection, they will not risk their lives. I see a comment from Devasham, CCMA commissioners and labour courts should be educated in dealing with whistleblowing. Martha raises question about how state institutions, including the SIU, can possibly be abused as a form of persecuting and harassing people. So there's a whole bunch of important issues going on. I guess I'm a little bit worried because we're running out of time. I'm going to throw you a difficult question, all three of you now. Everybody's saying the system isn't working well enough. The system doesn't give people reassurance. It doesn't give people protection. And yet the three of you have sketched out very concrete measures that, in my view, could be taken next week. Let me ask you to comment on this, starting with Professor Madonsela. Do you think there's the political will to protect whistleblowers? Do we have a problem of political will and political commitment because the system at the moment is so corrupted that it doesn't actually want whistleblowers to feel free and to succeed in pointing to all of the rot? And if it's not political will, what is the problem? Prof. Thuli Madonsela.
Thank you, Mark. I think there is political will. I just think the legislation process gets overwhelmed. In South Africa, we always think when there's a problem, we must change the law. And therefore, there's just too many laws. Instead of implementing the ones that we already have, there's too much. If we look at the whistleblower thing, there's been years of attempts to improve the law. I remember when Ben Turok was still alive, there was just a huge vibe around it. And therefore, perhaps we could ask the Department of Justice to put this one at the top of it. Just moving from this workshop, we make a special request and say, we know you have many laws that you're trying to pass through, but can you please prioritize this one? Because I do think government loses anyway. Government might have a lot of corruption in it, but I don't think an administration goes in and say we want to be corrupt, because if there's corruption, it means they themselves can't deliver on their own promises. And if they can't deliver on their promises, there is a possibility of recall. I mean, if you look at the local government elections, there's a huge possibility of recall for many public offices. And again, the next election is going to come up with another very real threat of recall. And why is that recall possible? It's on two grounds: social justice and corruption.
Thanks, Prof. Madonsela. So not necessarily political will, but prioritization and the people making it clear that this is an issue that we expect to be addressed as a number one priority amongst many other priorities. Willie Hofmeyr, turning to you, and a similar question I'm going to come back to Advocate Mothibi with as well. Blowing the whistle is one thing, ensuring successful prosecution and recovery of proceeds of crime is another, i.e., is it worth blowing the whistle if the system of criminal justice isn't going to successfully prosecute the corrupter? Advocate Hofmeyr, your response to that?
I'm an attorney, so you're not allowed to call me an advocate.
Willie Hofmeyr.
But, I do think a number of these proposals can be implemented relatively easily. There will be resistance, I think that's for certain. But I think we also have an opportunity at the moment where we have, I think, a president who is much better than the previous one, who may be willing to deal with these kinds of issues. And, I think it's up to civil society and activists to start mobilizing and say, let us do something about the law. For me, a good start would, I know some of the Department of Justice drafters who have recently retired, for instance. It's not a massively expensive exercise to go and try and draft the proposals we're talking about into a proper legal framework that can be presented to government. Or at a push, I suppose one can even think about a Glenister-type application that goes directly to the Constitutional Court to implement certain things if government's not willing to implement them. But I think at the moment we have a government who probably would be willing. And I think we should seize that moment while we have it.
Thank you, Willie. Advocate Mothibi, you'll need to put your audio back on as well.
Can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, I'm back online. Thank you. Mark, I was really just looking at some of the documents that I have here. There's a document drafted by the G20, and as I said, South Africa is part of the G20, and I'm talking the current legal framework, right? And then I do agree with my colleagues that these improvements we speak of are the improvements, and I really like how Professor Madonsela says that Department of Justice could be approached to prioritize these aspects. Yeah? So the G20 document, which was a study on whistleblower protection frameworks across the countries, it says amongst G20 countries, Australia, Canada, Japan, South Africa, and the United Kingdom, have passed comprehensive and dedicated legislation to protect public sector whistleblowers. So the point I'm really just picking up here is that currently we've got this legislation, which if we raise awareness sufficiently, and I really want to talk to the point raised by Mr. Vavi, that all those workers and in the employment space, if they become aware that when they report, it should be a safe reporting platform. And as you correctly said, there's a hotline there. We've got an independent company, at least as SIU, but of course other government hotlines are well managed as well, so that they know that it's safe and their identities could be protected, so that nobody knows. It's only the authorities that know that they've reported it. Now, so of importance is really to ensure that these measures that are in place currently are implemented, and that the witnesses and whistleblowers are aware of those. Now, with the improvements that are required, is really to ensure that the coverage of the legislation, and we go back to the definition of the whistleblower and the framework around witness protection, such that it grants anyone who is identified. And by the way, we as law enforcement agencies could also just lift up how we become proactive when we deal and engage with potential witnesses, whistleblowers. Be proactive in the sense that, as I mentioned as a scenario earlier on, that we inform them that these are your rights as a witness. You need to know that the witness protection works in that way. The whistleblower protection works in that way, so that upfront the witnesses are aware and they are able to exercise that option when a hazard visits them, simply because they have now blown a whistle. And by the way, Mark, more often corruption goes undetected until a whistleblower comes out. And I've said that to bring any successful prosecution, any successful litigation, you need credible evidence, and evidence doesn't just flow from nowhere. It's given by people. It's given by people, and those people have to be assured that the framework of the witness protection and whistleblower protection can really function such that they are protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate Mothibi. Unfortunately, our 1 hour has run past very, very quickly on a subject that is complex but simple at the same time. Simple in that we want to encourage people to do the right thing by reporting corruption wherever it occurs, and we want systems that protect people who report, and we want people to know that if they do take that risk, it will be a worthwhile risk, because the people who are stealing our taxes, stealing resources from the poor, will be prosecuted.
Well, Mark Hayward there from the Citizen Maverick, in conjunction, of course, with the Special Investigating Unit head. You heard the advocate Andy Mothibi talking about saying, corruption often does not be shown until a whistleblower comes forward. An important discussion that's been taking place there over the past hour about measures that can be put in place to protect whistleblowers as well as those that need witness protection. Some of the points that were made there by Willie Hofmeyr, for example, indicating that perhaps a database of lawyers who would act pro bono for some of these whistleblowers that come forward about important information need to be protected. They need to have a more secure way where whistleblowers can report about corruption that is taking place in certain areas. Advocate Mothibi also saying that when whistleblowers feel threatened, they should report that as well to law enforcement agencies. But the reality of it at this stage is that whistleblowers don't feel safe at this particular point. And you would have seen, of course, recently the murder of Babita Diakaran, who was the whistleblower in the Gauteng Health Department saga there. So many questions being raised about what more South Africa can do to protect whistleblowers.